Jamal Washington stands triumphantly on the courthouse steps, watching the police commissioner announce sweeping reforms while news cameras flash. 3 months ago, he was face down on his own pool deck with a gun to his head. One video changed everything. Before I tell you how a regular afternoon turned into a battle for justice, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever witnessed someone standing up against discrimination. This story will show you how one man's courage rippled through an entire community. Are you ready to see how Jamal turned the tables? Jamal Washington savored the rare weekday off, stretching his legs beside the crystal blue water of his backyard pool. At 38, the software engineer had finally achieved what many considered the American dream, a spacious 4-bedroom home in the prestigious Oak Ridge Estates, an exclusive gated community in suburban Atlanta. The neighborhood boasted manicured lawns, private amenities, and home values that started at 7 figures. Jamal had earned every square foot through 15 years of climbing the corporate ladder, overcoming obstacles that his white colleagues never faced. Despite his professional success, a cloud hung over his afternoon relaxation. His mother's medical bills were mounting kidney treatments that their insurance only partially covered, and his project deadline at work had been unexpectedly moved up. He closed his eyes, trying to let the warm Georgia sun melt away the tension in his shoulders. The subtle resistance from neighbors since moving in 3 months ago hadn't helped his stress levels. There were the lingering stares at community events, the surprise when he introduced himself as a homeowner rather than staff, and the way conversations abruptly shifted when he approached groups at the clubhouse. Jamal had grown accustomed to being the only black face in predominantly white spaces, developing a thick skin against microaggressions that white friends insisted he was imagining. The sound of footsteps on his pool deck snapped him from his thoughts. 2 uniformed police officers stood at the edge of his pool, hands resting near their holsters. The older officer, whose nameplate read Reynolds, had a weathered face with cold blue eyes that assessed Jamal with immediate suspicion. His partner, Stanton, was younger, leaner, scanning the property as if cataloging evidence. "Afternoon." Reynolds said, his tone clipped. "We received a call about trespassing and suspicious activity at this address." Jamal sat up slowly, conscious of how sudden movements might be perceived. "There must be some mistake. This is my home." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "You live here," the emphasis on "you" carried unmistakable weight. "Yes, I do," Jamal replied evenly, reaching for his phone on the side table. "I can show you my ID." Officer Stanton circled the perimeter of the pool deck, peering through the sliding glass doors into Jamal's home. "Nice place," he remarked, not complimenting but questioning. Reynolds examined Jamal's driver's license with exaggerated scrutiny. "This address was recently occupied by the Stevensons. I bought the house from them 3 months ago." Jamal explained, maintaining a calm he didn't feel. "Check the property records if you need to." Reynolds handed back the ID with visible reluctance. "Well, Mr. Washington, we still need to verify some things. These IDs can be faked, you know. And frankly, homes in this neighborhood they're quite expensive." The implication hung in the air like a noxious gas. "I'm aware of what my home cost," Jamal replied, his patience fraying. "I'm a senior software architect at Meridian Technologies." Officer Stanton had taken out his phone, snapping photos of the property. "Just documenting the call," he explained with a thin smile when Jamal noticed. "We have certain standards to maintain in Oak Ridge," Reynolds continued. "The residents here expect a certain level of community cohesion." Jamal felt his pulse quicken, but kept his voice level. "Officer Reynolds, I've answered your questions and shown my ID. Unless you have a warrant, I'd appreciate if you'd leave my property now." Reynolds' expression hardened. "Are you refusing to cooperate with police officers? That's typically what people with something to hide do." I'm not refusing anything. I've cooperated fully, but you have no legal right to be on my property without cause. Jamal reached for his phone again. I'm calling my attorney. The movement triggered an immediate reaction. Reynolds's hand moved to his weapon. Stop, hands where I can see them. Jamal froze, heart pounding. I was reaching for my phone. He's got something, Stanton called out, drawing his weapon. On the ground now. Reynolds barked, gun now pointed directly at Jamal. Face down, hands behind your back. In seconds, Jamal found himself pressed against the warm concrete of his own pool deck, the weight of Reynolds's knee on his back as handcuffs bit into his wrists. Through the sliding glass door's reflection, he could see neighbors beginning to gather on the street, watching the spectacle of a black man being detained on his own property, exactly the disruption to their community they had feared he would bring. With his cheek pressed against the sun-heated concrete, Jamal struggled to control the rage building inside him. The metal handcuffs bit into his wrists as Officer Reynolds maintained unnecessary pressure on his back. Jamal thought of his father's words from decades earlier, words passed down after his own encounters with racist police in 1970s Georgia. They want your anger. Don't give them the satisfaction. Your dignity is the one thing they can't take unless you surrender it. So while his body remained compliant, his mind raced with calculated precision. He focused on memorizing every detail. Badge numbers, exact words, spoken timestamps on his smartwatch visible from the corner of his eye. He would need it all later. I'm going to check inside, Stanton announced, heading toward the sliding glass door without waiting for permission. You can't enter my home without a warrant, Jamal stated firmly. Reynolds laughed a short, derisive sound. We have probable cause. Suspected trespasser with possible accomplices inside. Standard procedure. Jamal listened as Stanton's footsteps echoed through his home opening doors, rifling through rooms. Through the glass reflection, Jamal noticed movement in the neighboring yard. Sarah Chen, his next-door neighbor, had emerged onto her patio phone, held up unmistakably recording the scene. Hope flickered an independent witness. Reynolds noticed her, too. Ma'am, please stop recording. This is police business. Sarah didn't budge. I'm on my own property, officer. I have the right to record. Her voice carried the confidence of someone familiar with the law. You're interfering with police procedure, Reynolds called back, irritation evident. That could be considered obstruction. Actually, federal courts have consistently upheld the public's right to record police activities, Sarah replied calmly. I'm an attorney's wife. I know my rights and his. Reynolds's grip on Jamal tightened momentarily. More neighbors had gathered now, creating an audience that clearly made the officers uncomfortable. Mrs. Patel, from across the street, watched with open concern. The Jacksons, one of the few other black families in the neighborhood, stood rigid with recognition of what was unfolding. Others watched with expressions ranging from confusion to what looked disturbingly like satisfaction. Reynolds spoke into his radio, requesting backup and running background checks. Dispatch run Washington Jamal DOB, July 12, 1986. And also run a check on the Asian female next-door property, 1224 Oak Ridge Circle. The radio crackled with a response Jamal couldn't quite make out, but Reynolds's reaction, a subtle tensing, suggested something interesting had come through. Copy that information on Officer Reynolds. The dispatcher's voice came through clearly enough for Jamal to hear. Sergeant Wilkins is en route to your location. Inside the house, Officer Stanton was becoming increasingly frustrated. Jamal could hear drawers opening and closing with growing force. Finding everything you need, officer, Jamal called out, injecting his voice with a calm he maintained through sheer will. You know, those framed diplomas in my office might help explain how I afford this house. Stanton emerged moments later, his expression shifting between confusion and reluctance. There are family photos throughout the house, he said quietly to Reynolds. Looks like he does live here. Rather than acknowledge the mistake, Reynolds shifted tactics. Who called this in anyway? Jamal asked, still face down on the concrete. Who reported this so-called trespassing? Reynolds hesitated before answering. Concerned citizen reported an unknown black male where he shouldn't be. Would this concerned citizen happen to be Eleanor Whitaker from the house on the corner? The momentary surprise in Reynolds's eyes confirmed Jamal's suspicion, Mrs. Whitaker, a 72-year-old widow who served on the HOA board, had been particularly cold since Jamal moved in. She had reported his moving trucks as suspicious vehicles and questioned his presence at every community meeting. "How did you know that?" Stanton asked, revealing the truth unintentionally. "Because she's reported me before," Jamal replied, "for existing while black in what she considers her exclusive neighborhood." The officers exchanged glances. Their silent communication was interrupted by Stanton emerging from the house again, this time with a more serious expression. "Found a gun inside, locked in a safe, but still." He said it loudly enough for the gathering neighbors to hear. "It's registered," Jamal stated flatly. "I have a concealed carry permit. The documentation is in my office desk. Of course, if you'd asked before illegally searching my home, I would have told you that." Reynolds leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You think you're smart, don't you? Know all the right things to say. But trust me, boy smart-mouthed lawyers end up in just as much trouble as anybody when they don't know their place." The word boy hung in the air between them, a deliberate throwback to an era Jamal had only heard about from his grandfather. It revealed everything about Officer Reynolds that the badge was meant to conceal. The sound of another police vehicle approaching broke the tension. Sergeant Wilkins had arrived, and with him Jamal hoped would come the first step toward accountability for the humiliation burning through him like acid. What happens when your own neighborhood becomes a stage for public humiliation? What does it mean when those sworn to protect instead become predators seeking prey? Sarah Chen's unwavering phone captured every moment as Reynolds glared at her, unable to legally stop her documentation. Her husband, Michael, a prominent civil rights attorney with the Southern Justice Coalition, would receive these videos within minutes. "Delete that footage immediately," Reynolds demanded, his authority challenged by her quiet defiance. Sarah simply adjusted her position to get a better angle, ensuring every word and action remained on record. "I'm exercising my constitutional rights," she replied, her voice carrying across the adjoining yards. Officer Stanton shifted uncomfortably, suddenly very interested in adjusting his body camera, which by coincidence or design had malfunctioned precisely when their interaction with Jamal began. 2 additional patrol cars pulled up in front of Jamal's house, transforming a peaceful afternoon into what neighbors would later describe as a crime scene. Red and blue lights reflected off the pristine windows of million-dollar homes, creating a spectacle that drew even more onlookers. As if on cue, Eleanor Whitaker emerged from her colonial-style home down the street. The 72-year-old widow walked with purposeful steps, her pearl necklace bouncing slightly against her cardigan. Her arrival carried the air of a principal entering a classroom of misbehaving students. "I just don't understand," she announced loudly to anyone listening, "why that man is in Richard and Susan's backyard. The Stevensons would never allow such things." When Jamal, still handcuffed and seated on the ground after Reynolds had finally allowed him to sit up calmly, replied, "Mrs. Whitaker, I bought this home from the Stevensons 3 months ago. We've spoken at 4 HOA meetings." Her performance began in earnest. "I've never seen you before in my life," she declared, hand-clutching imaginary pearls. "I would certainly remember if the Stevensons had sold to a black family." Jamal completed her sentence. The gathered neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Whitaker's face flushed. "I was going to say to new residents, and regardless, there were children swimming just 2 houses down today. Anyone would be concerned about an unfamiliar person watching children." The accusation hung in the air as deliberately inflammatory as it was baseless. "Those children and their parents have been to my housewarming cookout," Jamal responded evenly. The Morgans and I are on a first-name basis. Do you see how quickly racism can transform from coded language to outright accusations? If you've ever witnessed someone being profiled based on their race. Comment number 1. If you believe Mrs. Whitaker should be held accountable for false reporting, hit that like button right now. And if you're wondering how this community standoff will escalate, subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. A large police SUV pulled up and Sergeant Thomas Wilkins stepped out. His presence immediately changed the dynamic. As one of the few black officers in the department, his arrival might have given Jamal hope for fair treatment. But Jamal had lived long enough to know that a shared skin color didn't guarantee allyship within a broken system. "What's the situation here?" Sergeant Wilkins asked, his deep voice carrying natural authority. Reynolds straightened out his posture. "Responding to a trespassing call, Sergeant." Subject became confrontational when questioned. Wilkins surveyed the scene, the handcuffed homeowner, the gathering neighbors, the unusual number of patrol cars for a simple trespassing call. His expression revealed nothing, but his question suggested concern. "You ran background before confirming residence. Standard procedure for the neighborhood," Reynolds replied, an answer that caused Wilkins' eyebrow to rise slightly. "Show me the ID," Wilkins requested. After examining Jamal's license, the sergeant made a call to dispatch confirming property records. The process took less than 2 minutes, the same verification that Reynolds had deemed impossible earlier. "Remove the cuffs," Wilkins ordered. As Reynolds reluctantly complied, the sergeant added, "Mr. Washington, I apologize for the inconvenience. My officers were following protocol for a reported trespassing." The word protocol did nothing to soothe Jamal's burning humiliation or explain why that protocol apparently included drawn weapons, illegal home searches, and handcuffs for a man simply existing on his own property. "Is protocol why Officer Reynolds called me boy and threatened me?" Jamal asked, rubbing his wrists. "I'm sure there was a misunderstanding," Wilkins replied diplomatically. "Officers Reynolds and Stanton are experienced officers with good records." The lie was so smooth it almost sounded believable. Almost. From across the street, an older white couple watched the scene unfold with unusual intensity. The man, tall, with silver hair and penetrating eyes, scribbled in a small notebook. His wife, equally attentive, whispered something that made him nod gravely. Jamal would later learn they were Franklin and Ruth Dobson. Franklin, a retired federal judge with 3 decades on the bench, had been observing Officer Reynolds with professional interest. As the officers prepared to leave without apology, without accountability, Reynolds leaned close to Jamal. "Friendly advice," he murmured just beyond his sergeant's hearing. "This is a nice neighborhood. People like you need to make extra effort to fit in, or misunderstandings happen. Next time might not end so well." The threat thinly veiled as concern sent ice through Jamal's veins. "I'd like your badge numbers," Jamal stated clearly, "and a copy of the incident report." Reynolds's smile never reached his eyes. "Always making it about race, aren't you, playing the victim card? We responded to a call and did our jobs. No one's fault you decided to move somewhere you don't belong." As the police finally departed, leaving Jamal standing in his own backyard, surrounded by neighbors who had witnessed his degradation. One question burned in his mind: how many other misunderstandings had Officer Reynolds engineered, and how many victims had lacked the resources or witnesses to challenge them? The sanctuary of his home had been violated, but something else had awakened in its place, a determination that would transform not just Jamal Washington, but an entire community. Jamal couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house, every passing car, on the street outside, sent adrenaline surging through his body. 3 days had passed since the pool incident, yet the humiliation and rage remained as fresh as the bruises circling his wrists. His spacious bedroom, once a retreat from the world's pressures, now felt exposed and vulnerable. At 3 in the morning, he found himself checking window locks for the 4th time. The security system he'd upgraded to the premium package blinked reassuringly, but technology offered little comfort against the violation he'd experienced. By dawn, he'd ordered additional cameras for every approach to his property, creating a digital fortress that felt simultaneously necessary and absurd. This was his home. He'd signed hundreds of pages of documents and transferred his life savings to make it so, yet he felt like an intruder in his own space. At work, Jamal struggled to focus on code that normally provided a meditative escape. His team noticed the dark circles under his eyes, his uncharacteristic silence during meetings. He'd told no one at Meridian Technologies about the incident, uncertain how it would be received in the predominantly white corporate environment. Instead, he channeled his sleepless nights into research, diving into police accountability statistics, civil rights precedents, and similar cases across the country. The patterns he discovered were both validating and depressing. What had happened to him wasn't an anomaly, but a systemic feature. His doorbell rang that evening. Sarah Chen stood on his porch, her husband Michael beside her. "We brought dinner," she said, holding up bags from a local restaurant. "And this." She handed him a flash drive. "The complete footage. I sent copies to secure cloud storage, too." Michael Chen's reputation preceded him, a Harvard-educated attorney who had successfully litigated several high-profile civil rights cases. His presence suggested this wasn't merely a neighborly visit. "The official police report doesn't match what happened," Michael explained as they ate at Jamal's kitchen island. "They claim you were confrontational from the start, refused to provide identification, and made threatening movements that necessitated restraint." Jamal's fork clattered against his plate. "That's a complete fabrication." "We know," Sarah assured him. "My video shows otherwise. But you should understand what you're up against." Michael's expression grew serious. "These cases are extremely difficult to pursue. Courts give tremendous deference to officer testimony. Proving racial bias is even harder. They never explicitly say that's why they targeted you." "But it's obvious, Jamal argued. "To us, yes?" Michael agreed. To a legal system designed to protect police from accountability, much less obvious. Reynolds will claim he was responding to a call following procedure and had no racial motivation whatsoever. That night, Jamal discovered the neighborhood Oak Ridge Estates group chat he'd never been invited to join. A sympathetic neighbor had sent screenshots where residents discussed the incident. Some comments made his stomach turn. Police wouldn't just randomly target someone without reason. "I've never felt unsafe here before, but now I'm wondering." Property values will suffer if this becomes a pattern. Others defended him. "I was there. The police were completely out of line." Jamal is a homeowner just like us. This would never have happened to any of the white residents. The community had fractured along lines that revealed pre-existing fissures. Further scrolling revealed something even more disturbing. Mrs. Whitaker had previously reported suspicious individuals, who turned out to be the Jacksons' relatives visiting the Patels' landscape workers and a black real estate agent showing a property. A pattern emerged of racial targeting disguised as community safety concerns. Jamal's phone lit up with a call from his sister Aisha, a journalist with the Atlanta Voice. "This needs to go public, Jamal," she insisted after he recounted the events. "This isn't just about you. It's about every black person who'll move into that neighborhood or drive through that area." His parents' reactions differed dramatically. His father, who had marched with King and weathered water cannons in his youth, urged action. "The only way systems change is when brave people challenge them," he counseled. His mother, who had lost a cousin to police violence in the 60s, voiced the fear that had kept generations of black Americans silent. "These people have all the power, baby. They can make your life hell if you fight them." Her words resonated as Jamal received an anonymous text the next morning, a community security alert describing a suspicious male, approximately 6 feet tall, athletic build, African American, as someone neighborhood residents should report. Though it didn't name him directly, the description matched Jamal perfectly. The doorbell rang again that evening, but instead of Sarah or another sympathetic neighbor, Franklin Dobson stood on the porch. The retired judge's presence was unexpected and initially unwelcome. "May I come in? Mr. Washington, I believe we have matters of mutual concern to discuss." Reluctantly, Jamal invited him inside. "I observed what happened the other day," Franklin began once seated. "It wasn't my first time witnessing Officer Reynolds in action." He removed his glasses, polishing them methodically as he spoke. 10 years ago, before my retirement from the federal bench, I presided over a case involving allegations against him. The evidence was compelling but ultimately insufficient by legal standards. Jamal studied the older man carefully. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I've spent decades watching the system protect itself," Franklin replied. "I've seen how qualified immunity shields officers from consequences, how internal reviews almost invariably clear their own, how burden of proof becomes nearly impossible in these cases." He leaned forward, "and I've come to recognize my own complicity in maintaining those barriers." The admission surprised Jamal. What changed? "Age brings perspective, Mr. Washington, and regret." Franklin's voice carried the weight of painful reflection. "There were cases where I didn't see the racial components clearly enough, where I gave unwarranted credibility to officers' testimony, where I upheld legal doctrines that protected power rather than people." He replaced his glasses. "I can't change those rulings now, but I can help navigate the system I helped create. If you're willing to fight this, and you should be, I may be able to assist." As Franklin Dobson outlined possible approaches and pitfalls, Jamal realized the incident at his pool had triggered a seismic shift. The sanctuary he'd worked so hard to create had been violated, but from that violation unlikely alliances were forming. The comfortable isolation of Oak Ridge Estates was giving way to something more complex and potentially transformative. The question was whether Jamal was prepared to become the catalyst for that transformation, knowing the personal cost would be substantial. His home might never feel the same again, but perhaps it could become something more important, a flashpoint for change. Michael Chen's dining room had transformed into an impromptu war room. Documents covered the polished mahogany table. Police reports, property records, complaint histories, and legal precedents. 5 days after the pool incident, Jamal sat surrounded by unlikely allies, plotting a response that had evolved from personal vindication to systemic challenge. "Reynolds has 7 civilian complaints in the past 3 years, Michael noted, highlighting a document obtained through a contact in internal affairs. 2 excessive force, 4 racial profiling, 1 illegal search, all dismissed for insufficient evidence or officer acted within protocol." Beside Jamal sat Tricia Jackson, whose 17-year-old son had been stopped 3 times while jogging in the neighborhood. Next to her, Raj Patel, whose visiting parents had been questioned while walking to the community mailbox. Sarah Chen poured coffee as her husband continued. "We've identified 15 residents in neighboring communities with similar experiences. Most never filed formal complaints, believing nothing would come of it. There's a pattern across 3 affluent neighborhoods," Jamal observed, connecting pins on a map they'd created. "All recently integrated, all with Reynolds responding to calls about suspicious persons who inevitably turn out to be homeowners or guests of color." Franklin Dobson, seated at the table's head, nodded gravely. "This isn't coincidental, it's targeted enforcement. Across town, officers Reynolds and Stanton were having their own strategy session at Flanagan's Bar, a known police hangout. Reynolds' phone buzzed with a text from a sympathetic dispatcher. "Washington's buddies requesting records. Chen involved." His expression darkened. "That uppity software guy is causing problems," he told Stanton. "And now he's got that ambulance chaser Chen involved." Stanton shifted uncomfortably. "The video doesn't look good, Brian." Maybe you should grow a spine." Reynolds cut him off. "Nothing on that video contradicts our report. We responded to a call. Subject was uncooperative. We followed procedure." He took a long swallow of beer. Besides, I've got friends at the union. They know how to handle these situations. Those handling methods became apparent the next day when Sarah Chen received 4 parking tickets in different locations across the city, all from the same officer. Michael's law office was suddenly subjected to a code enforcement inspection. Their son's car was pulled over twice in 1 week for rolling stops at neighborhood intersections. Intimidation tactics as old as policing itself. Meanwhile, Jamal delved deeper into Reynolds' history. Court records revealed a lawsuit settled 7 years earlier when Reynolds worked in a different district, a black business owner roughed up during a traffic stop. The settlement included a non-disclosure agreement that buried the details. Through discreet networking, Jamal located the man now living in Charlotte. He told me the same thing, Jamal reported to the group. Reynolds made comments about him being out of place in an expensive car, used almost identical language to what he said to me. Other victims emerged sharing similar experiences, but expressing reluctance to come forward publicly. They're afraid, Tricia explained. Most of us have lived with this reality our whole lives. You speak up, you become a target. Jamal's formal complaint to Internal Affairs received a predictably dismissive response. The official letter described the incident as a miscommunication and found no evidence of misconduct. The department considered the matter closed. Franklin Dobson made a call to Police Commissioner Diana Rodriguez, an old acquaintance from his judicial days. She agreed to meet privately at a cafe downtown. "I know Reynolds," she admitted after Franklin outlined the situation. "He's problematic, but he's also protected." The commissioner, a 47-year-old Latina who had risen through the ranks despite institutional resistance, understood the complexities all too well. The union contract makes discipline nearly impossible without overwhelming evidence. Body cameras that mysteriously malfunction can't be grounds for action. His sergeant signs off on everything. And frankly, the white homeowners in those neighborhoods love officers who keep things safe, which everyone understands means keeping certain people out. "So the system works exactly as designed," Jamal commented bitterly. Commissioner Rodriguez didn't disagree. Change requires pressure from multiple directions simultaneously. Internal mechanisms alone won't work. You need legal action, media attention, community organizing, and political leverage. Even then, it's an uphill battle. The group formulated a multi-pronged approach. Michael would prepare a civil rights lawsuit carefully constructed to overcome qualified immunity barriers. Aisha would develop media connections while they gathered more evidence. Franklin would leverage his judicial relationships to ensure the case received proper attention. Community members would organize neighborhood forums to build broader support. Jamal initially hesitated to become the public face of the effort. His corporate position might be jeopardized, and the strain was already affecting his health and work performance. But when news reached him about 16-year-old Darius Jackson being forced to lie on the sidewalk while walking home from basketball practice, another misunderstanding involving Officer Reynolds, his resolve hardened. "This isn't about me anymore," he told the group. "It's about making sure there isn't a next victim." That evening, Jamal found an envelope in his mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single-typed note. "Drop this now. Police response times vary greatly in emergencies. Accidents happen. Final warning." The threat confirmed what he already knew. He had struck a nerve, and powerful forces would resist accountability. But it also strengthened his determination. Systems maintained through intimidation relied on isolation and fear. By building community solidarity and strategic alliances, Jamal and his growing coalition were developing something that threatened those systems at their foundation: organized resistance backed by evidence, legal expertise, and moral clarity. The battle lines were drawn. For Reynolds and his supporters, this was about maintaining power and privilege under the guise of community standards. For Jamal and his allies, it was about transforming those standards to include justice and dignity for everyone. Neither side would retreat easily, and the escalation was just beginning. How far would you go to stand up against injustice when the system itself becomes your adversary? Would you risk your career, your safety, your sense of normalcy? Within 2 weeks of filing the civil rights lawsuit, Jamal experienced what Michael Chen called the backlash phase. Police cruisers drove past his house at all hours, slowing noticeably before moving on. His morning commute regularly featured a patrol car following him for several blocks. Anonymous calls to the HOA resulted in violation notices for landscaping irregularities and unapproved exterior fixtures, citations that referred to his security cameras. The message was clear: we're watching you. We can reach you anywhere resistance has consequences. Mrs. Whitaker organized what she called a community safety meeting at her home, attended by nearly half the neighborhood. According to Jamal's allies who attended, she never mentioned race explicitly, but spoke of outside elements threatening their way of life and property values. She distributed a petition supporting our dedicated police officers and opposing politically motivated attacks on law enforcement. 28 households signed. The coalition responded strategically. Weekly meetings rotated between homes growing from the original 5 members to over 30 residents from 3 connected neighborhoods. They created a secure communication platform to document police interactions, establishing patterns that individual incidents might obscure. Sarah developed a smartphone app that allowed users to quickly record encounters and automatically upload footage to protected cloud storage. Most significantly, they built relationships with officers uncomfortable with Reynolds's methods. Sergeant Wilkins initially maintained professional distance caught between department loyalty and personal integrity. But after witnessing Reynolds harass an Indian American doctor walking in the neighborhood without identification, something shifted. He contacted Franklin Dobson discreetly. "Reynolds is becoming more aggressive, not less," he revealed during a private meeting. "He sees this lawsuit as a personal challenge. He's determined to prove he controls these neighborhoods, not the residents." Wilkins couldn't publicly support the coalition, but he provided critical information about departmental politics and which officers might be sympathetic to reform efforts. The conflict escalated when Jamal's sister Aisha published a feature article in the Atlanta Voice titled "Policing Property or Policing People." The piece meticulously documented patterns of discriminatory enforcement in affluent neighborhoods, using Jamal's case as a central example, but incorporating numerous other testimonies. Within hours of publication, major outlets picked up the story. Local television requested interviews. Social media erupted with both support and backlash. "You've become a symbol," Michael warned Jamal. "That brings visibility to the cause, but also makes you a target." The warning proved prescient. Jamal's manager at Meridian Technologies called him into a closed-door meeting. "Several clients have expressed concerns about your public activities," she explained uncomfortably. "The company needs to maintain political neutrality. We value your contributions, but this situation is becoming disruptive." The implied threat to his livelihood was unmistakable. Meanwhile, Jamal's mother received anonymous phone calls with nothing but breathing on the line, a classic intimidation tactic. The neighborhood fractured further as families felt pressured to choose sides. Some residents formed a countergroup called Friends of Oak Ridge Police, hosting appreciation cookouts and placing blue ribbon decorations on mailboxes. The community that had once prided itself on genteel Southern hospitality now simmered with barely concealed hostility. Would you speak up if you witnessed someone being harassed because of their race, or would you stay silent to avoid controversy? Comment number 1 if you believe in standing up for what's right even when it's difficult. Hit that like button if you've ever had to choose between your personal comfort and fighting for justice. Subscribe to see how this community showdown reaches its breaking point. The confrontation Jamal had dreaded finally occurred at a gas station 5 miles from home. He was filling his tank when a police cruiser pulled alongside. Officer Reynolds emerged deliberately, positioning himself where security cameras couldn't capture their interaction. "Quite the crusader, aren't you?" Reynolds said, his voice conversational, but eyes cold. "Got the whole neighborhood riled up with your accusations, making life difficult for officers just trying to do their jobs." Jamal focused on the gas pump, saying nothing. "Here's something to consider," Reynolds continued. "Police response times vary greatly depending on circumstances. Emergencies happen all the time. Houses catch fire. Break-ins occur. Sometimes we just can't get there fast enough to help." He smiled thinly. "Be a shame if something happened at your place and help was delayed. Real shame." Jamal met his gaze steadily. "Are you threatening me, Officer Reynolds?" "Just stating facts about public safety," Reynolds replied. "Like the fact that troublemakers tend to have accidents, natural consequence of stirring up problems where they don't belong." What Reynolds didn't know was that Jamal had come prepared for this eventuality. A discreet recording device captured every word of the thinly veiled threat. The recording would become crucial evidence, but it also represented a dangerous escalation. Reynolds was growing desperate as pressure mounted. Franklin Dobson's network of contacts yielded unexpected connections. A retired administrator from the police union provided financial records showing Reynolds had received consulting fees from a private security company that contracted with homeowners associations. The same company had significant investments in real estate revitalization projects that profited from neighborhood demographic shifts. The police union president had ties to development companies specializing in neighborhood upgrades, a euphemism for gentrification. "There's more than racism at work here," Franklin explained as he laid out the documents. "There's profit. Reynolds and others benefit financially from keeping certain neighborhoods exclusive. Harassment drives away homeowners who don't fit the profile. Property values temporarily dip, developers buy at discount, and the cycle continues." The revelation transformed their understanding of the situation. What had appeared as individual prejudice was also systemic exploitation. Reynolds wasn't merely a racist officer. He was part of a lucrative mechanism that monetized exclusion and bias. The stakes had grown beyond one man's dignity or one community's values. They were challenging an entrenched economic system disguised as community policing. As tensions rose and threats intensified, Jamal questioned whether the fight was worth the cost. His sanctuary had become a battleground. His career was threatened, and normal life seemed like a distant memory. But each new family that joined their coalition, each story of harassment finally spoken aloud after years of silence, reinforced his resolve. The resistance wasn't just about challenging Reynolds or reforming one police department. It was about dismantling patterns of intimidation and exclusion that had shaped American communities for generations. The question was no longer whether Jamal could endure the battle, but whether the systems of power arrayed against him could withstand the growing solidarity they had inadvertently catalyzed. The Chen family's dining room erupted in chaos as Sarah burst through the door, mascara streaking down her face. "They took Andrew. They arrested my son." Her husband Michael dropped the legal briefs he'd been reviewing with Jamal and Franklin. What, where, when? Sarah struggled to compose herself, her normally calm demeanor shattered. He was walking home from Jason's house. 2 officers stopped him, said he matched a description. They handcuffed him and put him in a patrol car. "He's 17. Michael." They wouldn't let him call us. Michael was already grabbing his keys. Attorney mode activated. "Which precinct?" "Central booking." Reynolds' partner Stanton was one of the officers. The coalition mobilized with practiced efficiency. Within 30 minutes, 12 members had gathered outside the police station, including 3 with legal backgrounds. Aisha contacted her media connections. Franklin Dobson made calls to judicial colleagues. Inside, Michael Chen's voice carried through the precinct. "My son has been detained for over an hour without notification to his parents. He's a minor. I'm demanding his immediate release and access to any questioning." The desk sergeant recognized Chen's name from department scuttlebutt. This wasn't just an angry parent. This was the attorney spearheading the civil rights lawsuit against their officers. He made a quick call to higher-ups. Andrew Chen was released 20 minutes later, shaken but physically unharmed. The officers claimed he perfectly matched a robbery suspect description young Asian male in jeans and a hoodie, approximately 5'8". The actual suspect apprehended elsewhere was 5'11" and Hispanic. The mistake was too precise, too targeted, to be coincidental. It was retaliation, pure and simple, and it backfired spectacularly. Neighbors who had remained neutral could no longer ignore the pattern. The Morgans, who had declined to sign either petition, joined the coalition the next day. "They're going after children now," Ellen Morgan declared during an emergency meeting. "This isn't about property values or community standards anymore. This is about basic decency." The incident transformed the neighborhood dynamics overnight. Signs appeared in front yards, "We support our neighbors," and "Justice for all residents." The coalition's weekly meeting overflowed with new attendees, including residents who had previously avoided involvement. Meanwhile, internal fissures appeared within the police department. Younger officers and those from minority backgrounds increasingly questioned Reynolds' methods. Several approached Sergeant Wilkins, privately expressing discomfort with the targeting of specific residents. "I didn't become a cop to harass homeowners," one rookie confided. "This isn't what I signed up for." Commissioner Rodriguez faced mounting pressure from both sides. Reform advocates demanded action against the officers involved in Andrew's detention. Traditionalists, including the powerful union, insisted any discipline would undermine department morale and public safety. Rodriguez walked a political tightrope, publicly promising a thorough investigation while privately acknowledging to Franklin Dobson that her hands remained partially tied by contractual protections. The coalition's legal strategy shifted to focus on pattern evidence. Through persistent legal demands and Franklin's connections, they obtained body camera footage from 23 incidents involving Reynolds and Stanton in affluent neighborhoods. The footage revealed a disturbing consistency. White residents received courteous inquiries, while minorities faced immediate suspicion, demands for identification, and escalated enforcement. In 12 cases, the officers' report narratives contradicted their own camera evidence. "This is the breakthrough we needed," Michael explained as the team reviewed the footage. "One incident can be dismissed as a misunderstanding. 23 incidents establish a pattern that overcomes qualified immunity protections." The professional consequences mounted for Jamal. His performance review at Meridian Technologies cited concentration issues and distraction from core responsibilities. A promotion he'd been in line for went to a less experienced colleague. Team members who had once sought his mentorship now kept professional distance, fearful of association with controversy. The stress manifested physically: insomnia, tension, headaches, stress-induced eczema that left his hands raw and painful. Aisha worried about her brother's health. "You're carrying too much," she told him during a rare quiet moment. "This is taking a toll on you." Jamal couldn't disagree. His life had narrowed to work coalition meetings, legal consultations, and endless strategy sessions. Simple pleasures had disappeared under the weight of the fight. Yet whenever doubt crept in, he remembered Andrew Chen's face after his detention, Tricia Jackson's son avoiding his morning jogs, and the growing list of residents whose daily lives had been constrained by fear. "It's not just about me anymore," he told his sister. "It's about changing something fundamental." The coalition received an unexpected ally when Eleanor Whitaker's college-aged granddaughter, Madison, attended a meeting. The young woman had witnessed the pool incident while visiting her grandmother and had been troubled by it ever since. "My grandmother is wrong," she stated simply to the silent room. "What happened to Mr. Washington and others is discrimination, plain and simple. I can't change her mind, but I can stand with you." Her courage in breaking family ranks moved many to tears and signaled a generational shift in perspective. Pressure continued to build from multiple directions. The lawsuit proceeded despite procedural delays. Media coverage expanded beyond local outlets. Community meetings grew larger and more organized. Political figures began expressing concern about the department's practices. Reynolds, feeling the walls closing in, made a fateful error. Frustrated by the coalition's resilience, he fabricated reports claiming Jamal and other key members had threatened officers during routine patrols. The false reports might have worked in the past, but now they triggered immediate scrutiny. A junior officer who had witnessed one of the alleged incidents approached Sergeant Wilkins, troubled by the discrepancy between what he'd observed and what Reynolds had documented. Wilkins faced the most difficult decision of his career: maintain the blue wall of silence or uphold his oath to serve with integrity. After 22 years on the force, he chose integrity. He provided Franklin Dobson with evidence of Reynolds's falsified reports. That evening, Jamal received an unexpected call from Commissioner Rodriguez's office. A settlement offer had been proposed, a modest financial payment and reassignment of Officers Reynolds and Stanton to different districts. In exchange, they would drop the lawsuit and sign non-disclosure agreements. "They're scared," Michael observed when Jamal forwarded the offer. "They know we have them cornered, and they're trying to contain the damage." The coalition faced their own moment of truth. Accept a resolution that might provide immediate relief but leave the system intact, or press forward toward more substantial but uncertain change. As they debated this crucial decision, the community divisions they had exposed continued to deepen, setting the stage for a public confrontation that would transform not just Oak Ridge Estates, but policing practices throughout the county. The Oak Ridge Estates Community Center had never been so crowded. Every seat was filled with people lining the walls and spilling into the hallway. Camera crews from 3 local stations positioned equipment near the back. What had been announced as a community dialogue on public safety had transformed into something more consequential: a public reckoning. After rejecting the settlement offer, the coalition had raised the stakes. They filed an expanded federal civil rights lawsuit and contacted the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. Aisha's media connections ensured coverage extended beyond local outlets to national platforms. Politicians previously hesitant to engage now issued statements of concern. The pressure had forced this unprecedented community forum with Commissioner Rodriguez, department leadership, neighborhood representatives, and coalition members all present. Jamal sat at the front table, flanked by Michael Chen and Franklin Dobson. Across from them sat Commissioner Rodriguez, the police union president, Calvin Brooks, and a department attorney. Officer Reynolds and Officer Stanton occupied seats to the side, Reynolds projecting confident defiance, while Stanton appeared increasingly uncomfortable. Mayor Thompson opened the proceedings with carefully neutral remarks about community healing and productive dialogue. Political language designed to acknowledge concerns without assigning blame. Commissioner Rodriguez followed with a more substantive statement. "The department takes all allegations of biased policing seriously," she assured the audience. "We are committed to examining our practices and ensuring equal protection for all residents." Brooks, the union president, struck a different tone. "Our officers face split-second decisions in challenging situations. Monday morning quarterbacking by people who've never worn the badge doesn't serve public safety. Officer Reynolds has an exemplary record of protecting affluent communities from criminal elements." The coded language drew murmurs from the audience. When Reynolds took the microphone, he portrayed himself as a dedicated professional being persecuted for political reasons. "I responded to a citizen complaint about a potential trespasser," he stated firmly. "I followed standard procedure for the situation. At no point did race factor into my actions or decisions. This has been blown out of proportion by individuals with an agenda against law enforcement." Stanton nodded along with his partner's account, but remained noticeably silent himself. When Jamal's turn came, he approached the situation methodically. Rather than beginning with his personal experience, he presented the evidence chronologically. Sarah's video footage, the dispatcher recordings confirming no mention of race in the original trespassing call, the falsified police reports, the pattern data from similar incidents. This isn't about one afternoon by my pool, he concluded. It's about systematic targeting of the residents based on race across multiple neighborhoods. It's about officers using community standards as cover for harassment and intimidation. It's about accountability for those entrusted with extraordinary power. Previously unseen footage from other incidents shocked many attendees. White residents described being checked on by officers who never left their vehicles, while footage showed those same officers demanding identification and conducting searches of minority residents in identical circumstances. The statistical pattern was undeniable. 93% of suspicious person stops in 3 affluent neighborhoods involved minority residents, despite those neighborhoods being over 70% white. The audience reaction shifted perceptibly as the evidence mounted. Eleanor Whitaker, who had arrived prepared to defend her community safety concerns, appeared increasingly distressed as her pattern of reporting only minority residents was documented. When confronted directly about repeatedly reporting Jamal, despite knowing he was a homeowner, she broke down. "I was just trying to protect our neighborhood," she insisted tearfully. "Property values matter. Standards matter." "From what exactly were you protecting the neighborhood, Mrs. Whitaker?" Michael Chen asked pointedly. "From homeowners with different skin colors than yours." Her inability to answer spoke volumes. Commissioner Rodriguez announced an independent investigation and policy review, but her measured response felt inadequate against the weight of evidence presented. "Too little, too late," someone called from the audience. Union President Brooks went on the offensive, questioning Jamal's motives and character. Mr. Washington moved into an established community and immediately began creating division. He turned a routine police response into a racial crusade. This is activism masquerading as victimhood. The room tensed at the accusation. Franklin Dobson, speaking for the first time, commanded attention through the gravitas earned from decades on the federal bench. "I've spent my career evaluating evidence and making judgments based on fact, not emotion or prejudice," he began. "What we've seen today isn't a matter of interpretation or perspective. It's a documented pattern of differential treatment based on race, implemented through institutional practices and protected by systemic barriers to accountability." His voice carried the weight of both authority and personal reckoning. "As someone who long participated in that system, I bear responsibility for its failures. But acknowledging failure is the first step toward redemption for individuals and institutions alike." The community center fell silent, the retired judge's words hanging in the air. The silence broke with an unexpected voice. "He's right." All heads turned toward Officer Stanton, who had risen from his seat. Reynolds shot him a warning glare, but something had shifted in the younger officer. "I can't do this anymore." Stanton continued, his voice gaining strength. "What Mr. Washington described is accurate. What the videos show is real. We were instructed to maintain neighborhood character through differential enforcement." Reynolds's face darkened as his partner continued. "Officer Reynolds specifically told me to watch for minorities who didn't belong in affluent areas. We were harder on them, quicker to escalate, more demanding of identification and justification for their presence." Stanton turned to face Jamal directly. "What happened at your pool wasn't a misunderstanding or a mistake. It was exactly how we were trained to respond to minorities in white neighborhoods." The room erupted. Reynolds lunged to his feet, pointing at his partner. "You backstabbing coward! This is all lies. He's trying to save his own skin." His uncontrolled outburst, the mask of professionalism completely dropped, revealed more than any testimony could have. Commissioner Rodriguez called for order as Reynolds continued his tirade, each word digging him deeper. These neighborhoods pay premium taxes for premium policing. They expect us to keep certain elements out. That's the job. Security personnel finally escorted Reynolds from the room, his last shreds of credibility evaporating with each profanity-laced accusation. In the aftermath of Reynolds's meltdown, the community's divisions crystallized. Some residents, primarily older and exclusively white, expressed concerns about undermining police authority and compromising security, but they were now a clear minority. Most attendees across racial lines recognized the evidence as irrefutable and the need for change as urgent. Mayor Thompson, sensing the political winds, announced the formation of a police practices review board with citizen representation. Commissioner Rodriguez, looking both exhausted and resolved, committed to immediate administrative reassignment of both officers pending investigation results. The community forum ended with no neat resolution, no moment of universal agreement. Real change rarely arrives in a single transformative moment. Instead, it unfolds through accumulating actions, shifting perspectives, and persistent pressure against entrenched systems. As Jamal left the community center that evening, both death threats and awards for courage awaited him. The path forward remained challenging, but for the first time since that afternoon by his pool, he felt something that had been in short supply throughout the ordeal: hope. 3 months after Jamal Washington found himself face down on his pool deck with a gun to his head, he stood on the courthouse steps watching a press conference that would have seemed impossible that afternoon. Commissioner Rodriguez, flanked by Mayor Thompson and community representatives, announced comprehensive reforms to departmental policies. Today marks a new chapter in community policing, she declared to assembled reporters. We are implementing mandatory bias training, community oversight of complaint investigations, and transparent reporting of enforcement patterns by neighborhood and demographics. Behind these public pronouncements lay weeks of intense negotiation, legal pressure, and community activism. Officer Reynolds faced both departmental charges and criminal investigation for falsifying reports and civil rights violations across multiple incidents. His 19-year career had effectively ended, though the union continued fighting for his pension. Officer Stanton received a 6-month suspension and mandatory retraining, but avoided termination due to his eventual cooperation with investigators. His testimony proved crucial in documenting the systematic nature of discriminatory enforcement. Most significantly, he now worked with the newly formed Police Reform Committee, providing insider perspective on problematic practices. The neighborhood itself underwent its own painful but necessary transformation. Community meetings facilitated by professional mediators created space for difficult conversations about implicit bias, belonging, and the true meaning of safety. Residents who had never considered how their concerns affected their neighbors of color began listening to lived experiences previously invisible to them. Eleanor Whitaker initially resisted these changes, insisting she had been misunderstood and unfairly portrayed. But when her granddaughter Madison threatened to cut contact if she continued denying her actions, something finally broke through. Under the guidance of Reverend Johnson from the nearby Baptist church, Mrs. Whitaker participated in a reconciliation process that began with simple acknowledgement: I reported people based on race, not behavior. I was wrong. The Homeowners Association, once a subtle enforcer of exclusionary standards, underwent its own revolution. New bylaws explicitly prohibited discrimination in enforcement. The board, previously all white, despite the neighborhood's growing diversity, now required representative membership. Community events intentionally built connections across racial and cultural lines. For Jamal, the aftermath brought both healing and new purpose. The foundation he established with his settlement funds provided legal support for victims of racial profiling and developed educational programs for police departments seeking reform. Their citizen reporting app, initially created for Oak Ridge residents, became a model adopted by accountability organizations nationwide. His career took an unexpected turn when Meridian Technologies CEO, facing public pressure, not only apologized for the company's initial response, but created a new position for Jamal, leading corporate diversity initiatives with genuine authority and resources. His home gradually reclaimed its intended role as sanctuary rather than battleground. The security cameras remained, but now represented prudence rather than fear. The pool where everything began hosted community gatherings where children of all backgrounds splashed together while parents built genuine connections. Unexpected relationships formed in the crucible of conflict. Franklin and Ruth Dobson became regular dinner guests at Jamal's home, the retired judge, finding purpose in mentoring young lawyers on recognizing bias in legal proceedings. Sarah Chen launched a campaign for city council with a platform centered on redefining community safety through accountability and investment. The Jacksons and Patels, once isolated in their experiences of discrimination, became community leaders in building inclusive neighborhood practices. Even some officers privately expressed gratitude for changes that improved their working environment and community relationships. One veteran described it as returning to why I became an officer in the first place, to protect everyone, not just some. Jamal's phone rang as he prepared for a neighborhood barbecue in his backyard. The Department of Justice was calling. His case had sparked similar accountability initiatives in police departments across 3 states. Communities previously resigned to discriminatory enforcement now had both a template and hope for meaningful change. As neighbors began arriving for the gathering, the Chens bringing dumplings, the Patels with samosas, the Jacksons contributing their famous cornbread, Jamal took a moment alone by his pool. The water reflected clouds drifting across the Georgia sky, peaceful now where there had once been chaos. A patrol car drove slowly past his home part of the regular neighborhood rounds. The officer inside one of the department's reform advocates raised a hand in respectful greeting. Jamal returned the gesture, recognizing that transformation required both confronting injustice and building something new in its place. The struggle had never been solely about holding individual officers accountable, though that mattered deeply. The greater victory lay in changing the systems that enabled and protected discrimination, in transforming a community's understanding of who belonged and deserved protection, in replacing fear with connection across differences previously treated as barriers. What began as humiliation beside a backyard pool had rippled outward, touching lives far beyond one neighborhood or police department. The work remained unfinished. Transformation always does, but the direction had irrevocably changed. Have you ever witnessed a moment when standing up against injustice created ripples beyond what anyone expected? How do you think communities can better bridge divides and ensure equal treatment for all residents? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If Jamal's journey of turning pain into positive change inspired you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of everyday heroes challenging broken systems. Share this video with someone who needs to understand how seemingly small actions like recording an injustice or speaking truth in a community meeting can catalyze meaningful transformation. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the ripples of resistance. And remember, change begins with those brave enough to stand their ground even when standing alone. Jamal's story teaches us powerful truths about creating change in the face of systemic injustice. First, individual courage matters. One person standing firm can inspire others to find their voices. Second, evidence is crucial. Without Sarah's video documentation, the pattern of discrimination might have remained invisible to many. Third, unlikely alliances can transform communities. From retired judges to teenage activists, change requires diverse perspectives, united by shared values. Fourth, resistance to accountability that will be fierce when power structures are threatened, but persistence can overcome intimidation tactics. Fifth, real transformation happens at multiple levels, simultaneously. Legal challenges, community organizing and institutional reform, and personal reconciliation must work together. Perhaps most importantly, Jamal's journey reminds us that lasting change requires both confronting injustice and building something better in its place. When we move from individual incidents to addressing systemic patterns, from punishment to accountability, from division to community, we create possibilities for justice that ripple far beyond what any single person could imagine. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wondered if speaking up could really make a difference? Jamal's story shows how one person's courage, combined with community support, can transform an entire system. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button so you never miss these powerful accounts of everyday heroes standing against injustice. Drop a comment sharing a time when you witnessed someone standing up for what's right. Your story might inspire others to find their voice. Hit that like button. If you believe in creating communities where everyone is treated with dignity regardless of their appearance. And please share this video with someone who needs to understand how racial profiling impacts real people with real lives. Thank you for joining me in these important conversations about justice, courage, and transformation. Remember, the ripples you create today might become the waves of change tomorrow.